What is happening, sweet angels? Trumpeter and composer and bona fide theory nerd Bobby Spellman here to welcome you to our frequently asked questions video to wrap up this leg of the Lydian Chromatic series. We're going to do a casual episode today and talk about some of the questions that came up in the comments throughout the 10-part Lydian Chromatic concept series that I have been releasing throughout the summer. I wanted to get to some of your questions and give a little answer and get a little deeper into some of these concepts on this episode. So come with me on a little journey through some frequently asked questions on this exciting episode of Theory with Bob. All right, before we dive into the questions, I wanted to say big thanks to everybody for all of the kind comments and the positive responses to the video. That really means a lot to me. I'm glad that some people are interested in this. I wanted to put out this video series for a while because a lot of these concepts are very interesting to me and I've spent a lot of time playing with them. But it's helpful to, I wanted to try to get some information out to people who are curious about this but haven't been able to find good resources on some of the fundamental concepts of the Lydian Chromatic concept and the ways that it can be used. So I hope the series has been helpful for you. I know a lot of you are trumpet players and maybe it hasn't been as helpful for you if you're just trying to learn how to play the trumpet. But those of you who are jazz improvisers or rock and roll improvisers or metal improvisers or composers of any kind who are interested in music theory, I hope it was an interesting and helpful series for you. I will continue to put out videos on the Lydian Chromatic concept in the future, but for now I think I'm going to return to conventional music theory and trumpet videos and things of that nature for a little while. If I find that there are some unexplained features of the Lydian Chromatic concept that I want to dive deeper into, we will use this series as a foundational series of videos so that I can expand on some of these concepts more in the future. But for now, there's a couple questions that came up during the videos, and I wanted to address them today. So, perhaps the most common question that was asked, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase this because it came in many forms, but it basically goes like this. Why should I care about this? Or alternatively, how can I actually use this stuff? Or how is this any different than just standard chord substitutions in jazz theory and functional harmony? So in order to answer this question, I wanted to get just briefly into what music theory really is. So in my view, music theory can be divided into two concepts. And there's probably more than that, but for now we're going to stick to two of them. The first is the idea of putting names to sounds that we are familiar with hearing and the way that we organize sounds. So this deals primarily with sort of the objective nature of sound and the way that putting different sounds together gives us certain responses. Now, this could be, for example, that if we take a major third and we place a minor third on top of it, that gives us a major triad. That also may have to do with the idea that if you are playing the third in an ensemble, for example, if you're playing the major third in a major chord, you may want to bring the intonation on that down a little bit in order to make the triad, sound as in tune as it can be. Things of that nature. It deals with explaining intervals and chords, naming things so that we can better analyze music that we love and we can have a better understanding of what to expect if we use certain concepts in music. So once again, that deals not so much with the conventions of any particular style, but more with just the nature of the way that music works if we divide a scale up into 12 notes, for example. The second element of music theory is more prescriptive, and that has to do with a way of describing how to play certain styles of music. This is really the practice of music. So I often think of music theory as being music theory and music practice. So for example, if you are studying composition, it is very likely that you will have to write for example, a Baroque chorale or a two-part invention, something of that nature. And if you are learning to write that style of music, you will learn that you cannot use parallel fifths. However, if you are in a rock band and you are trying to play music in the style of, for example, AC/DC, you will need to use parallel fifths because that's how you're going to get your power chords and it's going to sound awesome. So the practice part of music theory really has more to do with the conventions of particular styles rather than the sort of more objective sound of the way that different intervals sound together or the different ways that chord progressions will work, just in terms of the way that they sound. So the Lydian chromatic concept basically does not deal with at all prescriptive methods of trying to play particular styles of music. It deals almost entirely in the first idea of music theory, which is just to try to put words to the sounds that we are familiar with and to try to explain the way that different groups of tones will operate, with one another. So if you're looking for a way to use this in order to sound exactly like Charlie Parker playing bebop, you don't need to get into the concept, in the Lydian chromatic concept, and all of the nitty-gritty and minutia involved in this. In fact, it may be a detriment if you spend a lot of time dealing with Lydian chromatic concept terms instead of practicing conventional standard bebop language. In fact, you don't even really need to know music theory to be able to play jazz music if you just want to copy as closely as possible people that you like to listen to. Certainly many of my favorite musicians probably had a tenuous grasp of music theory, and many of the other ones had a very strong grasp of music theory. It doesn't always correlate. But all that being said, I have found it extremely useful to have a concept of music theory because it gives me an idea of what to expect when I'm playing different styles of music and different ways of exploring the music that I'm trying to write or improvise. So another point that I will make is if you are just a trumpet player or an instrumentalist of any kind and all you want to do is play and you want to play in a particular style that you are familiar with, you don't really need to dive too deep into this stuff. But if you are a composer or an improviser and you want to try to explore many of the lesser explored realms in music, I think the Lydian chromatic concept is a really useful resource and a very interesting way of viewing the sort of many styles of music that we might encounter on a day-to-day basis. The way that I think of the Lydian chromatic concept is sort of as a bird's eye view, looking at many different and often sort of conflicting styles of music. So by breaking it down into this idea that the perfect fifth creates this ladder of fifths that can be used to organize all the various modes, not only in Western music and in jazz, but in music from around the world, I think that it can really be a useful tool in bridging the gap between these different styles of music, one, and between playing inside and playing outside music. So when I was a kid, I grew up in the Boston area, and there's a lot of music schools in Boston, but sometimes people don't always venture out into the jazz scene. But it's really a remarkable scene in Boston, and one of the things that I think is striking about it is that a lot of the musicians, it's really a part of the energy of the place that everybody's playing sort of inside-outside music. And I think that probably comes from the history of NEC and Berkeley being there, and the idea that you had people like Jackie Byard and Sam Rivers and Tony Williams coming out of there, and you had people like Rand Blake, who is still there, and of course George Russell playing around with different sounds and providing a certain environment that was conducive to inside-outside playing. So I grew up going to the Lily Pad on Monday nights to hear the Fringe when I was a kid. When I was in high school, and George Garzone and John Lockwood and Bob Gulati would blow my mind playing all kinds of music that was inside or outside, and I loved the idea of being able to bridge the gap between more consonant styles and more conventional styles and all of the music that came after the 60s that dealt with some more stratospheric playing. All right, so to me, the Lydian chromatic concept has been very useful because rather than just having inside notes and outside notes, here's the chord, here's notes that are outside the chord, all right, we're borrowing from the minor version or all this other stuff that we learn about at Berklee College of Music and other places like that. I found that it was very useful because, as has been mentioned in previous videos, it gives you a way of viewing notes as being increasingly distant from the tonic pitch of a chord or the greater key of a piece, things of that nature. So to me, the ability of the Lydian chromatic concept to give us a sort of bird's eye view of all these different components in the music and the different styles of music means that I can then bridge the gap between sometimes seemingly incompatible styles of music. And on a similar note, I think it's worth mentioning that functional harmony and the conventions of the styles that we learned growing up playing jazz and classical music are all one facet of this multifaceted view of music theory. So it's sort of more of a horizontal tonal gravity approach, but certainly conventional theory lives within the Lydian chromatic concept. It's just one part of it rather than being the whole thing. So you can look at it as being sort of the Lydian chromatic concept is containing many styles of music rather than just giving a prescriptive way of dealing with one style of music. Again, if you're just trying to learn how to play bebop like Charlie Parker or like Chet Baker or like, you know, whoever, your best bet is to transcribe those solos and to learn the various figures that they played and the language that they used and try to play around with those kinds of ideas. But if you want to take it into the stratosphere and explore the many different possibilities that you may not have heard before or that may be a less conventional approach to improvisation or composition, I think the Lydian chromatic concept is a good place to be. Oh, another thing that I think is worth mentioning in this note is that if you are not, I should have mentioned this in the beginning of the series, but if you do not have a background in tonal harmony, conventional Western music theory, this is not a good place to start. You need to have an understanding of these sort of styles that we're dealing with on the regular. So to go in and understand that in C this is the 1 and this is the 4 and this is the 5 and what intervals are, things of that nature are all very important to have as an understanding before diving into the Lydian chromatic concept. I have many students who are learning improvisation, various things of that nature, music theory in the beginning, and I generally do not talk about this stuff at all because you need to have a foundation in conventional music theory before this becomes useful to you. All right, let's move along. So on a similar note, Leonard Levy asked, how does this apply to soloing over modal tunes? So one of the things that is sort of a foundational principle or concept or understanding of the Lydian chromatic concept is that it deals with modal music. Now, I think there are two answers to this question. There's a historical answer and there's a practical modern-day answer. The historical significance of the Lydian chromatic concept appears to me to be that before we, especially Miles Davis, but some others as well, in the 50s started dealing more with modal music, jazz music was a lot of chords. So if we're dealing with bebop, for example, I mean, you can think about all of the music that Miles Davis made before 1958. Oftentimes you'd have two or more, two chords a measure or many chords. You're dealing with functional harmony. You're dealing with forward-moving sounding chord progressions and some often very complicated melodies in the bebop realm over those chords. I think that the Lydian chromatic concept gave jazz musicians permission to use just two chords in a piece or one chord in a piece. To that note, I heard an interview recently with Miles Davis, and he talks about one of the influences for Kind of Blue being an African band that he heard in which one of the musicians was playing an mbira, which is this instrument here, little thumb piano, and oftentimes in African music it's very modal. It might just be one chord or one mode in a tune. This instrument in particular only plays in one key and then some kind of strange atonal stuff that I really like. But by and large, you're dealing with one key, and that Miles Davis described as being one influence on Kind of Blue. But I think that the Lydian chromatic concept gave Miles Davis and others permission to play just one chord and deal with the modes rather than dealing with all of the intricacies of bebop language and functional harmony, landing on the third, going from voice leading from chord to chord and outlining all the chords and things of that nature. In modern application, now that modal music has become a standard in jazz, I think the value of the Lydian chromatic concept is that it gives you so many different options. It's more than just saying, oh, here's so what, we can play D Dorian over this thing. Instead, you can say, all right, well, let me try out these different notes that come from higher tonal orders to try to create different modes that may have a different color, may evoke different emotions, may create different dissonances in the music, things of that nature. One way that you can hear, one example of that, is in Kind of Blue on So What itself. If you listen to Miles Davis's solo versus John Coltrane's solo, you can hear that even though the underlying chords are the same, they're treating their approach is very different in the way that they're creating melodies using certain note choices. Same thing with Cannonball Adderley, but I think it's a very stark contrast between Miles's approach, which is very inside the chords, and Coltrane's approach. You can hear the way that he takes a very different kind of melodic approach to the underlying modal harmony of that tune. So we have that option nowadays, is to be able to play whatever notes we want over the various chords of a modal tune, knowing what the relationship of these various chords are from inside to outside. Another way that you can use that is playing outside the changes, using the circle of fifths to try to navigate different scales over other chords, things of that nature. I think it just gives us a firm way of connecting these varying chords and scales. So hopefully that was made clear in my videos on playing outside the changes and different resolutions and pantonality, things of that nature. I hope that that was conveyed, but that's my thought on playing modal music. The other thing that the Lydian Chromatic concept does well is if you take a modal piece like Joe Henderson's Inner Urge, sometimes those chords can seem somewhat unrelated, or it's hard to wrap our minds around like the relationship between sometimes seemingly unrelated chords that don't fit into a convenient, let's say, functional harmony framework. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of the Lydian Chromatic concept, you can treat it almost the same way you would treat a piece that was dealing with primarily functional harmony. All of a sudden, a lot of these modal pieces like Sam Rivers' Beatrice, or like Inner Urge, or like any number of other probably Woody Shaw tunes, things of that nature, Eric Dolphy music, a lot of this all of a sudden seems to work exactly the same way that functional harmony does, just sort of in a more extreme way. All right, gang, I thought I'd be able to do all of this in one video, but this is getting a little long, so I think it might be wise to break this up into two frequently asked questions videos. So we're going to call it for this week, and I'll put out another video next week with the other frequently asked questions, covering some more ground on the Lydian Chromatic concept. If you like this video, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and we will catch you next time for a couple more frequently asked questions to wrap up this leg of the Lydian Chromatic series. All right, gang, have a wonderful time making some music, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya. Theory with Bob. All right, gang, thanks so much for checking out this video. We hope it helps in your quest for the majesty of musical self-expression. The Ridgewood School of Music is currently accepting new students for lessons online or in person in the Brooklyn, Queens, and New York City area. If you'd like us to help set you up with the perfect teacher for the instrument or style that you're interested in studying, you can find us on our website at www.ridgewoodschoolofmusic.com, or you can shoot us an email at ridgewoodschoolofmusic@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to support the creation of new videos like this one, you can find us on our Patreon at patreon.com/Ridgewood School of Music. There, as a subscriber to the Patreon, you can gain access to bonus content, including bonus videos, exercises in improvisation and different instruments, as well as bonus transcription videos. So, if you'd like to help support the creation of new videos like this one, find us on our Patreon, and it's a real big help. All right, gang, have a wonderful time practicing, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.